Member for Ballina.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. I rise today to talk about the issue of public transport in the Northern Rivers. In a few days, the government will take the next step in deciding the future of the rail corridor from Casino to Moolumbar. It is clear the government's preference is to rip up the existing rail line and effectively privatise the corridor for a rail trail. The effect of this decision would be to permanently shut off the ability to use this corridor, which links many of our region's major centres and important tourism locations for passenger rail services. The government's Northern Rivers Regional Transport Plan, completed in 2013, identifies the growing need and many of the issues associated with transport in the Northern Rivers, but lacks the strategic thinking and allocation of resources to connect our towns and villages, our employment centres and tourist attractions. It identifies the need to improve public transport, but fails to map out how to do this in a way that can deliver real results for our region. Recently, I was reminded of the importance of access to quality public transport when one of my staff caught the bus from Ballina after work last week and struck up with a conversation with a young bloke, Dave, not his real name, who had just been to visit his aunt in Lismore Hospital. It's about a 45-kilometre trip between where Dave lives and Lismore. Dave had an accident about 8 years ago, which left him with a brain injury and epilepsy. He had to stop working as a chef because of the epilepsy. Dave is also no longer able to drive, which means he's reliant on friends or public transport. And in my electorate of Ballina, that is limited to private bus services. Dave was visiting his aunt because she needed help to run errands while waiting for surgery. To do that, Dave had to travel by bus from Byron via Ballina and then on to Lismore on different buses run by different operators and then return the same way. The whole trip took 10 hours, the entire day. Despite the challenges, Dave was grateful for the $2.50 day pass available to disability pensioners and very complimentary of the local bus service and local drivers who clearly knew him well. But while the $2.50 is a small price for Dave to pay, the cost to our community from what is a clearly broken transport system in the Northern Rivers is significant. Dave's story is a symptom of the lack of strategic planning and investment in public transport in our region over many years. The reliance on private vehicles and failure to put in place public transport to support tourists is clogging our region's local roads and is now a significant impediment to local businesses and residents. Access to education, training and employment is a challenge for local residents, and access to employees is challenging for local businesses. Expression of interest documentation for the rail corridor requires that proposed projects involve walking, cycling or riding tracks that involve removal of the rail infrastructure or other recreational uses of rail lines. There is no mention of the use of the rail line for commuter or public transport services, despite many local people wanting just that. This is despite the existing corridor running between Byron Bay and major tourism sites and towns. From a tourism perspective, restoring a rail service makes significant economic sense for our region and can deliver both visitors and local people travelling for jobs. The Greens are not opposed to a tourist bike trail running alongside the rail corridor and the new opportunities for tourism and recreation that a multimodal rail corridor would bring. But to rip up an important piece of community infrastructure, particularly while there is still no real plan to invest in a public transport strategy for the next 50 years in our region, would be a retrograde step. Thank you.